You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast, Episode 528, Extreme Risk.
Welcome into another episode of Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. I'm Norman Lau.
And I'm John Champion. Each week on Mission Log, we examine an episode of Star Trek, picking it apart for the morals, meanings, and messages, and asking ourselves, in the end, if it stands the test of time.
This week, Extreme Risk, the one where Tom Paris risks his brand new shuttle on a dangerous mission, and B'Elanna Torres risks her own well-being while dealing with the residual traumas in her life.
I'll be right back with trivia in a moment, but first Norman would like to tell all of you how to reach us.
Mission Log is a conversation about Star Trek. Drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com and join us on X and Facebook at Mission Log Pod. While you're at it, leave us a review and a rating at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. And please remember, your comments could be used on Mission Log or Engage on the Roddenberry YouTube channel. And now here's John Champion with this week's trivia.
All right, Extreme Risk has a sole writing credit by Ken Biller, but as we know, that's not the full story ever. It was, in fact, a collaboration between Brannon Braga, Ken, and no less than Roxanne Dawson herself, who conceived of the idea that shaped this story. Roxanne was interested in pushing the B'Elanna character even further, exploring her depression and seeing the way that condition expressed itself in the guise of self-harm. Now, Brannon and Ken both agreed to pursue this idea, and it was Ken who was given the assignment. This was directed by Cliff Bole, and it has been a while since we covered Cliff's directing work on Voyager. Back in Season 3, he helmed the Q and the Gray, and he will be back for 2 more installments in the Delta Quadrant. Now, if you don't recognize the skydiving outfit that we see on B'Elanna in the teaser, look again. You might recall that we shared a bit of trivia with you back when we covered the movie Star Trek Generations, that a scene of Kirk doing an orbital skydive was cut out of the final film. Well, Roxanne is wearing the same costume that Bill Shatner wore to film those scenes. By the way, side note to that trivia, even though that scene of Kirk was cut out of Generations, you can actually get an action figure of Kirk wearing the orbital skydiving costume, but you can't get an action figure of B'Elanna Torres wearing that same costume, even though her scene actually made it to film. Now, let's meet our guest stars. We have to say welcome back to Alexander Enberg as Vorik in a blink and you'll miss him appearance toward the end of the show. And we meet a new representative of the Malon here. His name is Vrelk, and he is played by Hamilton Camp. And we got to see Hamilton twice before in the role of Lek on DS9's Ferengi Love Songs and The Magnificent Ferengi. He got his start, though, back in the mid-1940s, and he spent the better part of the next 7 decades in all manner of TV guest spots, voice character work, and feature film appearances. He was a regular on the Richard Benjamin, Paula Prentice vehicle sitcom He and She, and later in his career, Hamilton turned up in everything from Heaven Can Wait to Joe Dirt. Hamilton passed away in 2005. This episode of Star Trek Voyager is his final Trek appearance.
Welcome to the Delta Quadrant. There are so many things you can do in the holodeck. So hey, let's be careful out there.
Prologue. Aboard a Class II shuttle, B'Elanna prepares for what appears to be an extremely high orbital skydiving adventure. She instructs her pilot to ascend further, but he rightfully objects, cautioning her about the risk of thermolysis at 200,000 meters. Nonetheless, Torres leaps out and hurtles towards the surface when she's summoned to engineering by Chakotay, prompting her to abruptly terminate her holodeck program. Following orders, greatly annoyed and visibly distracted, B'Elanna bumps into 7 of 9 in a corridor and quickly delegates their multispatial probe launch to 7. B'Elanna mentions not feeling well and asks Seven not to notify the doctor. Act 1. That very same multispatial probe is ensnared by a Malon tractor beam, and Voyager is too far away to intervene. Harry pilots the probe from the bridge, and Tuvok proposes using a polaron burst to break free. While successful, Tom points out that the probe can't outrun the Malon ship, but Captain Janeway puts the probe's Borg shielding to the test. She recalls a gas giant nearby where the probe could hide, and in doing so, the Malon ship pursues the probe and is crushed by the gas giant's gravity. Later in the briefing room, the crew strategizes on how to best retrieve their probe, since its telemetry is vital to mapping this section of space. Tom uses this opportunity to push for his new shuttle design, the Delta Flyer. Faster, more maneuverable, heavily armored, and their solution to their problems with their outdated Class II shuttles. Janeway gives him the green light and everyone is excited to get to work. Everyone except B'Elanna. Her attitude in the briefing and later her attitude when the team is collaborating on the design is the same, aloof and uninterested. When she brings the thruster specs to Tom's quarters, he confronts her about her recent attitude. She shies away from their conversation, and on her way to her quarters, B'Elanna returns to the holodeck, overrides the safety protocols, and engages in deadly hand-to-hand combat with her old Alpha Quadrant enemies, the Cardassians. Act 2. Voyager enters high orbit around the gas giant to recover the probe. A new Malon freighter and new captain demand they leave, blaming Voyager for a previous loss. The Malon captain insists on taking the probe as compensation. Janeway tells the Malon to steer clear of any vessels with the name USS Voyager, and the two captains find themselves at an impasse. Chakotay believes that the Malons are after the probe for its multispatial technology, possibly to find new areas to aid in their toxic waste disposal. After B'Elanna returns to her quarters for a combat simulation in the holodeck, she addresses her considerable wounds and pauses to take a deep look at herself in the mirror. Later, she surprises Neelix and wants to catch up with him, but remains aloof and untethered despite Neelix's pleasantries. She reminisces about her grandmother's banana pancakes, but after a bite, leaves the rest untouched, claiming she must return to work. On the bridge, Janeway considers what to do with the Malon ship and their claim on Voyager's probe. Seven reveals in Astrometrics that the Malons are building a similar shuttle to Tom's and are likely to finish 36 hours before the Delta Flyer. Janeway decides it's time for a space race. Oh, it's on. Act 3. The crew is hard at work on the Delta Flyer, pushing the limits of their skills and patience to finish before the Malons, but the pressure gets to B'Elanna, who snaps at Vorik for his engineering tool making too much noise. Meanwhile, as the clock ticks away, Tuvok and Tom argue the finer points of design aesthetics, to the point where B'Elanna takes it upon herself to test whether or not the state of the Delta Flyer's hull armor can withstand the pressure. She recreates a new holodeck simulation with the parameters for the Delta Flyer needs to survive the probe's retrieval and disengages safety protocols in the holodeck once again. She discovers the location of microfractures on the Flyer but is injured when the simulation jolts, and she passes out. Meanwhile, Vrelk vents a small amount of theta radiation as a warning for Janeway to back off and let them recover the probe. He knows that Janeway's crew, like his, is building a retrieval ship of their own, and it is only a matter of time for either of those ships to be ready and beat the other team to the probe. Janeway needs her crew to speed things up and needs Voyager's shields reinforced, but is informed that B'Elanna is in the holodeck. Unsure as to why, Chakotay makes his way to find her, only to discover B'Elanna lying unconscious in a plummeting Delta Flyer, which is ready to buckle from the gas giant's pressure. Chakotay halts the program and hails the doctor to receive a medical emergency. Act 4. In sickbay, the doctor revives B'Elanna after almost 12 hours of unconsciousness. He discovers old, badly treated internal injuries, prompting Janeway to ask B'Elanna some very pointed questions about her recent behavior. B'Elanna reacts defensively, leading Janeway to suspend her from working on the Delta Flyer. However, it's when B'Elanna quietly agrees with that decision that Janeway truly senses something is wrong. In the ready room, Tom reports that the Delta Flyer's engines are nearly 90% efficient, with only the hull's microfracture problem remaining unsolved. Janeway shifts the conversation to B'Elanna, and both Chakotay and Tom agree that investigating her holodeck programs might reveal the truth about her condition, including any potential harm. Later, Chakotay confronts B'Elanna in her quarters. She admits that the doctor suspects that she has clinical depression. Chakotay wants to review the programs B'Elanna has been running to assess her condition and potentially allow her to return to duty. However, he instead exposes B'Elanna to her own holodeck program, revealing her struggle to cope with the loss and trauma of her former Maquis family. Chakotay insists she confront her emotions and grieve, emphasizing that Voyager is her new family. Suddenly, Chakotay is summoned to the bridge as the Malon open fire on Voyager with spatial charges, trying to distract Janeway from giving chase. Act 5. Janeway needs the Delta Flyer to launch immediately and sends Chakotay to provide additional engineering support. But B'Elanna tracks him down and pleads her case with Chakotay to let her go on the Delta Flyer, insisting she's the best engineer for the job and needs to do it. With B'Elanna on board, the Delta Flyer spots the Malon shuttle. It launches spatial charges, forcing 7 of 9 to retaliate with photonic missiles, hitting the Malon shuttle 3 times. However, the Delta Flyer's structural integrity begins to fail. Despite this, they retrieve the probe, but secondary systems remain offline. B'Elanna and 7 seal a panel, and B'Elanna erects a force field just before the panel breaches using a phaser and an EPS conduit. Meanwhile, the Malon shuttle struggles to leave the atmosphere, allowing Janeway and Voyager to escape unharmed. Later, B'Elanna sincerely thanks Chakotay for his actions in the holodeck, but warns him against repeating it, half-jokingly threatening to break his neck. She then enjoys a plate of banana pancakes, this time with maple syrup. The end.
Nicely done, Norman. Nice tight recap there. Appreciate it. Man, I'm going to sound like a broken record in this episode, and I apologize, but I just want to preface everything that I say in this episode with, again, who is programming a holodeck where one can even disengage safety protocols? Like, you make that as a thing. Like, I just say, make a holodeck where you can't disengage safety protocols. Let's just call it the safe holodeck.
Yeah, I have actual more extensive notes on that for later on.
I have a very serious set of extensive notes about that, too. And look, I know right away this episode is not about that, but I think it has to be addressed, okay?
Right.
When we're in the holodeck, not a great effect, but a significant effect that shot of B'Elanna kind of righting herself and then stepping down from the program. Very ambitious thing to do, and that was not an actor. That was all CG doing that. So I feel like it didn't age particularly well, but I thought it was a very cool thing to have. And, of course, I love that outfit. I think that costume is very cool.
I always thought that when you go off duty, you're allowed to stay off duty.
Nope.
And then, nope, I guess not. Yeah, you're on call all the time. I guess if you're the head of a department, you're on call all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's what they call it, the non-exempt workforce.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And as much as I do love the orbital suit as as a costume, I still have a little bit of a nit to pick when it comes to changing into specific uniforms or outfits before you go into the holodeck, because shouldn't the holodeck provide all of that for you?
You would think. I mean, again, it's sort of like Tom's wrench. The holodeck should just be making all of that for you.
Like, literally the only thing that you should walk into the holodeck with is like your uniform or like a skin-tight bodysuit or something, and then all of a sudden everything's a hologram around you.
Yeah.
Right?
Although, okay, I could see maybe in this case, because the orbital suit is something that you probably have on a starship. Like, that is a thing that exists on a starship because you may have to do that at some point. In fact, there's probably one stashed in a closet of every shuttle. There should be. But now Tom's coveralls for the 1960s garage, that does not need to exist on a starship, and you don't need to waste a replicator ration on that either.
Yeah. A little weird there.
Yeah, a little bit weird. I'll tell you what's not weird, some good branding on that probe.
Yeah. I love the branding. I love the design. It's just something that was new in terms of like just Federation tech that we saw.
Does Master Replicas have one of those? I don't know if I've ever seen a model of it.
I don't think so, and I would really like for that to happen because
like
it's so cool.
Yeah. I do think, Tom definitely has a point about making the new shuttle. In fact, I would go so far as to say that Tom always had a point. In fact, from the very beginning, as soon as Voyager found itself in the Delta Quadrant, they should have just been building stuff all the time. They should have been building shuttles, build photon torpedoes. They should be constantly manufacturing things.
It would help if there was something like in the captain's log where Janeway said, well, since we've established, really good supply chain, allies, and now we don't have to worry about replicator rationing and things of that nature or energy consumption.
Yeah.
That's not a problem anymore. But it's like when Tom says, well, we're just going to recreate or replicate all the alloys for the Delta Flyer. I'm like, wait, aren't you guys under rations still? I mean, don't you have to save up like a week's worth of stuff for like a cookie?
Right.
Or something like that.
Right.
Or didn't like Chakotay, in Year of Hell, like a month's worth of rations for a pocket watch?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Now you're dealing with like an entire shuttle.
Yeah.
And all the pieces. I mean, what are they going to do? It's like the old Eaglemoss subscription to build your own shuttle. Pieces come a month at a time or what?
But that's still the kind of thing that, I agree. You could either address that in a little bit of the dialogue, or if this had been a show that was sort of designed serially, then you could say like, oh, hey, when we were at this planet, we're picking up these materials because we're going to do this thing. And then that has some payoff like 3, 4, 5 episodes later. Like that would be really cool,
They could have scrapped those deep sleep compartments.
Yeah, the stasis chambers.
The stasis chambers, yeah. And turn that into Delta Flyer.
Yeah, we're going to hammer these out.
Yeah.
Turn them into a shuttle. Yeah. I really like, these are good moments, seeing everybody come together to do something creative and productive. And I really like the idea of designing in the holodeck. Like, you get some fun stuff with Tuvok, but it's just cool to see them there designing and working together. And look, far be it from me to bring up the science, because I know that there are people in our audience way better at this than I am. But if a probe just flew into a gas giant, wouldn't the gravity have already captured the thing well before the Delta Flyer would be finished? I mean, it wouldn't just be kind of bopping along in the atmosphere, because the gas giant even has a core of something. It would just smash down into that core, probably in very little time.
Yeah.
I would think. But anyway. And got to give a shout out to the cool T-shirt.
Hey, I'm glad you brought that up, because I love these T-shirts.
Yeah, they're great.
And when I can wear one, I will. But, so in Night, when we saw Chakotay in his T-shirt and Janeway in her T-shirt, they look like regular T-shirts. But this one has like really intricate kind of like piping and panel work and a reinforced collar. It looked like specifically made so that like a hero shirt.
Yeah.
It was as opposed to just a background shirt.
Even better. Yeah. Again, we get to disable. I'm not going to call out every time we disable the safety protocols, but this time we do it with a Cardassian. Kind of fun.
Here's my note on that. I think I have other notes also. But I always feel like when the safety protocols are turned off, it's just leaning on the fact that you can create more drama. Because when you really think about why this holodeck was created, no one would probably program the ability for it to kill you accidentally or on purpose. Right?
I think we'll come back to that.
All right.
I think we will.
I will not steal your thunder.
Okay. All right. I think we'll come to it. Man, the Malon are just still filthy. That's kind of fun to see. But there is this interesting line here where Vrelk calls out Janeway and says that she is responsible for the deaths of 9 Malon. And Janeway is like, but they were trying to steal our probe. Really? That's the best we could... Okay, this is going to tie into some of my other comments about the episode. But then the Malon want the probe, so what? It's got multispatial technology. Okay, they're going to do something with that? We already blew up their wormhole, and we're just getting out of there. So they want a probe. You could just leave. You could just leave.
They're going to create a new shuttle. Why can't they just create a new probe?
A new probe. Thank you. Thank you. A new probe. It could even say Voyager on it, just like the first one. Nice scene with B'Elanna and Neelix. I feel like he's very kind. I mean, he is anyway, but he's really... He gets it as soon as she walks in the door, and she's actually vulnerable, which we really need as a counterpoint to her arc in this episode.
I love that scene, and I love Roxanne and Johnny like working together. But in the reality of it, why couldn't B'Elanna just replicate her own pancakes?
I thought of that too, and I thought, sometimes you just want to be in a restaurant where somebody brings the food to you. Even if the food is the same as what I could get myself, I just want somebody to bring it to me.
Maybe it's a comfort issue, sure.
Maybe.
With her. There's this scene where she's sitting with Neelix and listening to him talk, not really paying attention to him. And then there was a scene in the briefing room earlier where Roxanne does this really excellent version of the 1,000-yard stare, where she's just staring out into nothing.
Oh, man.
And you really felt like, okay, something's really off here.
Yeah, agreed. Cut to, I'm really impressed by how 7 of 9 is just spying directly into the Malon ship. Like, this is something that I don't think we've really seen on Star Trek much before. She's just like, there's people walking around and they're doing this and they're building that. Was there ever a conversation about how she's ethically maybe not allowed to do certain things, or has Janeway just given up and just, this is our secret weapon, just let her loose and then she'll do this kind of thing to our benefit?
Hey, John, they were going after the probe first, right? 9 lives. I mean, come on.
They were, yeah. What's a few more?
Yeah.
Now, I made a note here about the CG exterior of the Delta Flyer in the cargo hold. Turns out it was not CG. That was a matte painting or some combination of matte objects, and it didn't hold up great. I felt like, bravo for the attempt, because usually a scene that is that brightly lit, it's a challenge to do, and with that much detail. So, like, A for effort, but it's not a great-looking effect today.
So Tuvok says to Harry when they're trying to get the shuttle ready to launch, Tuvok says, proposing the same flawed strategy over and over again will not make it more effective, Ensign. So that's Vulcan for the definition of insanity.
Yes.
Right? And for me, I think it was Tuvok's best line in the episode. That was stone cold Tuvok right there.
Yeah, exactly. I like the idea of the analog controls. That's kind of a fun idea. I don't necessarily love the implementation in there, but I get Tom's impetus for that.
So if someone else wants to use the Delta Flyer later on, are they going to have to be trained by Tom to use the analog controls? Because that's like his thing. It's like, okay, I want to borrow your car. Can you drive stick? No.
Right.
But I will try because, hey, you like knobs and gears, and that's your 1968 Corvette with stick shift. I'm like, but I got to go to the grocery store. Can I just drive it? Well, yeah, that's kind of the same thing, right?
Good point.
Yeah.
We go back to the holodeck then. I'm just going to save it for the next segment.
When Chakotay enters B'Elanna's program, though, if the safety protocols are overridden, wouldn't that have killed Chakotay too?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
If the Delta Flyer simulation exploded?
Yeah.
And if it explodes with the doors open, does the explosion continue into the hallway?
Oh, we're going to get to all of that.
Oh, okay.
This is a holodeck heavy episode.
All right.
Yeah. Really good Janeway scene in sickbay, because I felt like this is the Janeway that I really like to see. It's that combination of tough commander, tough leader in charge, but just with the right amount of compassion and sincerity. It was so nice. I really wish we got more of Janeway like that. Agreed.
And especially when she lifted B'Elanna's chin. It's kind of like, it'll be all right. We'll work this out. We'll work through it.
Yeah.
So B'Elanna was out for 12 hours. So was Vorik in charge? I mean, who's the second in command of engineering, right?
I guess so, yeah.
Because, he was there when they're working on the Delta Flyer. And, I mean, having like a one deep bench isn't sustainable for like physically or mentally.
Look, we had all that time in the void, and they could have trained like 10 other people for engineering. I think that would have been a great idea during that time off. Yeah. Then, there's Tom Paris just, working on microfractures, just clueless about B'Elanna. I think we'll come back to that. Yeah, right. Yeah. And then B'Elanna's rather gruesome holodeck program, which obviously makes sense based on what she's going through. But I really appreciated the kind of callback that we did, because it wasn't just necessarily the callback to, hey, remember the Maquis, remember she was part of this, but this really specific moment in Hunters when Chakotay told B'Elanna that the Maquis had been killed. And I thought that was just like, if you're really paying attention to the story, that's the moment that they're referencing. And then she's kind of extrapolating from that and trying to live this in a way because she wasn't there.
Yeah, it was a nice callback. And that's kind of like that soft serialization that we've been really enjoying with Voyager so far. It's just that between Hunters and now, there's kind of like a void of building that as part of her character.
Well, I think we're going to come back to that too.
All right, we should just cut this and go to discussion.
No, there's a lot of important stuff. Yeah,
B'Elanna ran that program for 47 seconds, which is where we get our 47 reference in.
Is all it takes.
Yep. And Chakotay's scene with B'Elanna, and his kind of like his friendship and advice to her, and his empathy, it proves to me that Robert Beltran's a really good actor when you let him act.
Yeah.
Right? When you write really good scenes for this character. It's just not often enough to make this character the character that we want him to be. Yeah. I wouldn't say it's too little too late. I haven't seen the rest of the series, but I like what I saw in this episode.
I agree. What I don't like seeing is Vorik just, you're out of there.
Get out of my chair.
I mean, just bring him along. Like, it can't hurt to have him along.
So that means he is the second engineering in command.
He's got to be. Yeah.
I mean, who else would it be?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Nobody. Yeah, certainly not that guy that, she punched in the face back
Whatever
in the
happened to
beginning.
that guy?
I know. Yeah, Carrie, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I got to say, Delta Flyer's interior, very photogenic. And it was just a good choice to give the shuttles shuttle singular. But overall, we've seen so many shuttles on Voyager and in Star Trek in this period up until now. It's really nice to see something new. And I love the split level and the additional windows. It's sharp. It's really, I like the interior better than the exterior, honestly.
But I like the CGI launch. I thought that was well done.
That was cool.
That was nice.
Yeah. And a very good effect with the panel warping. Like, it was just enough, and it kind of got across what you needed to get across. And I like that kind of novel solution by B'Elanna, the timing on that. And some really cool hardware, like the EPS relay that's got to be pulled out of the... Like, this is an elaborate set, and it's really well done. Yeah,
she MacGyvered that force field generator, right?
Yeah.
I love it when engineers MacGyver things. With the panel microfractures, though, didn't it seem like there was tinfoil on one side, and then behind the actual production, like there were like engineers like pushing their fingertips through kind of like tinfoil just to show off that something's happening?
100%. And I love it.
Yeah, I love it too. I love practical effects like that, if in fact that were the case.
Rewind a little bit. We just talked about the 9 Malon that Janeway is responsible for killing in this whole thing, and we get to the end of the episode, how we're going to resolve it. Okay, the Malon are having a problem climbing out of the atmosphere, and then Janeway is like, okay, I guess it's time to go. She hates these people.
At the very least, turning off the holodeck safety protocol should alert sickbay that their services might be needed.
We'll get right back to Extreme Risk after a word from this week's sponsor, Rocket Money. Hey, have you found yourself lost in a galaxy of subscriptions, wandering through the vast expanse of streaming services, fitness apps, delivery memberships, all that stuff, only to realize that you have been paying for things that you forgot about? That's the worst feeling. Mm-hmm. Well, fear not, because Rocket Money is here on your journey of personal finance. Rocket Money isn't just your average finance app. It's like having, Norman, like having a loyal crew by your side, helping you to navigate the financial cosmos. Picture this. You with me?
I'm with you.
Okay. All right, picture this. You're cruising through your subscriptions, and suddenly you spot one that's sucking latinum from your account faster than a rigged Dabo table. Yeah, that's heavy. Yeah. Now, with Rocket Money, a few taps are all it takes to cancel that pesky subscription and reclaim your hard-earned money.
There's more, though, John. There's more.
Oh, more. There we go.
Ever wondered where your money disappears to each month?
So often.
Well, Rocket Money's got your back with a sleek dashboard that compares your spending from this month to the last, helping you chart your financial course with precision. Plus, they'll even help you set up a custom budget to keep your spending in check. so you can boldly go where no budget has gone before.
I like the sound of that. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings.
And Rocket Money isn't just about cutting loose ends. It's about boosting your savings, like a warp drive on overdrive. They'll swoop in and try to negotiate and lower your bills for you, all with the ease of sending a subspace transmission. Just snap a pic of your bill, send it their way, and let Rocket Money handle the negotiations while you sip your Earl Grey tea and contemplate the mysteries of the financial universe. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's features.
So stop wasting money on things that you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/missionlog. That's rocketmoney.com/missionlog. rocketmoney.com/missionlog.
Hey everyone, I'm Jessica Lynn Verdi.
And I'm Mike Richards. You might know us from our ventures into space as your hosts of the Roddenberry podcast, Mission Log the Orville.
Mike and I have been granted some shore leave, so we're here to talk about Ted, the new series on Peacock by Seth MacFarlane.
Bear Fight presents Talking Ted, where we'll chat about the show with the cast and crew, all while responsibly enjoying a bit of Bear Fight whiskey.
So be sure to watch Ted the series and then check in with us every week for Talking Ted, presented by Bear Fight. Cheers, Mike.
Cheers, Jess.
All right, Norman, we teased it. Well, I teased it more than once in the last segment about the holodeck. Yeah. All right, this is a serious episode about a serious topic, but at the same time, I feel like I want to talk about this other thing as well. So can we talk about the safety protocols on the holodeck?
I think we should.
For just a moment.
Yeah, I think we should.
Okay. I know that we joke about it all the time, but we get more commands in this single episode than any other I have ever seen to override the safety protocols. And look, I know that we will get like 100 different emails saying, like, no, it actually works like this. But actually is just what we see on screen. And there is no actual holodeck. But I think it's very interesting to project here a little bit and figure out, or just open the discussion, what are the legal or ethical or moral implications of having that at all? This is just rife with landmines, maybe literal, but certainly figurative when we talk about how the holodeck works. Right. So think of it this way. Somebody had to conceive of the holodeck. Presumably multiple teams of people had to actually design it and figure out how it works. And then other people, maybe a few, maybe a lot of people, designed the programs. And at a certain point, the computer just kind of takes over. So you can be like B'Elanna and just give it parameters, and then the computer fills in the gaps. So what happens then when someone turns off the safety protocols and they are badly injured? Because we've seen that before. Or they die. And I don't think anybody designed the holodeck to have lethal intent. But it certainly seems like that is a possibility. And you just brought it up in the last segment. Like maybe the computer has a stopgap and maybe these safety protocols, quote unquote, are just sort of a way to say like, okay, how intense does this simulation get? Can you actually be hurt? But think about it. Chakotay walks in and B'Elanna is there unconscious on the floor of that simulated shuttle. What happens then if, say, the other person that they're with is badly injured or potentially dies? Or, and we'll get into this part of the discussion about B'Elanna in a moment here, what do you do when somebody like B'Elanna is emotionally deeply compromised? One could even say borderline suicidal. I mean, I'm glad that they have the discussion where she says that she is not, but the expression of self-harm is really intense in this episode. What happens when that person just has the ability to walk into the space? And here's where I think the conversation gets really off the rails. How creative does the computer have to get with possibly killing the user. I mean, in this case, it was creating a hull breach on a planet with a deadly atmosphere. So what's the next step here? B'Elanna's passed out. She's on the ground. The microfractures are destroying the shuttle around her. What does the holodeck do next if Chakotay doesn't walk in? Does it flood that space with toxic superheated gases? And when the crew start digging around in their holodeck programs, that's a whole other privacy question. I mean, is that okay? It's kind of a public resource. But I really found what was going on with the holodeck here very disturbing. We've had many other incidents where, the holodeck goes off the rails, but it's nobody's particular fault. And then if we go back to It's Only a Paper Moon, okay, then we have the holodeck as kind of a therapeutic thing, but there is the possibility of addiction, although I would still say that Nog should have been allowed to spend even more time there if he needed to, with some balance. I found this just a lot, to be quite honest.
Well, we did bring up certain examples where you can kind of parody the outcome of all these different possible scenarios, because in my opinion, the holodeck in Star Trek since the very beginning has been used as needed, to facilitate the drama of the episode, the plot armor via the holodeck in order to facilitate the narrative, right? Purely
a plot device. And Ken Biller said in developing this episode that it was kind of okay, we need the sci-fi element here. So the sci-fi element is going to be that.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, what are we really doing with B'Elanna here? And sure, I get it, but once you go that route, I think you just open up all these other questions about how this thing works, because we are in there an awful lot. B'Elanna's story hinges on this.
And this goes all the way back to the Killing Game. The Hirogen wouldn't have been able to do what they wanted to do if it weren't for the fact that they could turn off the safety protocols and threaten the crew with actual murder and death. And torture.
Yeah.
Right. But it goes all the way back to, if this were an actual in-universe situation and we, a Senate hearing committee, brought up the manufacturers of holodeck technology and how it was distributed to, our armed services, we would ask them, so was it really a good idea for all of these emotionally compromised people on this ship to be able to get to essentially what was kind of like a death box, if they wanted it to be?
Yeah.
And they're well, gee, I didn't really think of it that way. And I'm surprised that everyone on the ship, every crew member, at least that we've seen, has the authority to override safety protocols. I mean, wouldn't that be,
right,
I don't know, incumbent upon security to be able to do that for somebody, or in a training exercise to make that training exercise maybe a little bit more authentic so that they would train more specifically, for that danger?
Now, that's interesting because, you could see a situation where you could turn off the safety protocol, but you can only do it with the authorization and supervision of somebody else.
Yeah.
Look, people in the armed forces, they do simulations and war games all the time, but they're not firing at each other with live ammunition.
Unless you're the mobile infantry. And we learned that lesson with Starship Troopers.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I thought there was another kind of interesting ethical question going on here with the holodeck. Chakotay, were his efforts really ethical? Because we go straight from Janeway saying, hey, go find out what you can, and if you need to snoop through her records, that's okay. Well, okay, I think reasonably you could make the argument that on a ship, you probably give up some level of privacy, and that something like a holodeck record is public to the extent that a senior officer or somebody who has the clearance could access that. I think you can make that argument, But what Chakotay does is shows up at her room in the middle of the night and forces her into this simulation. And I thought that was clearly that's why this guy is not a counselor. Now, made for a dramatic scene. It made for a moment as kind of the catalyst to get her to be honest with herself. But I think in any sort of realistic situation, a therapist, a counselor would not do that. I thought the reveal of where she was and what was going on, again, very interesting. And all I could think about was back to DS9, B'Elanna lives here.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because how can she not? Made for great drama, but when you start to think about the real-world implications of these things, I thought there was a lot of room for concern.
Well, another thing that I was concerned with, and this is something that I think you should show more than tell. Mm-hmm. I'm concerned with where Tom is in this entire equation in his and B'Elanna's relationship. Now, I understand that there were...
You and me both.
Right?
Yeah.
There were on occasions where he said, to his defense, that B'Elanna's been shutting him out as of late. Mm-hmm. There's a wonderful scene with the two of them trying to figure something out. Tom says to B'Elanna, how many times have we talked about how great it would be to do what we're doing now, to really collaborate my piloting skills and your engineering expertise? Now, last time I checked, John, never.
Yeah.
Right? In the history of the show, I have not heard that kind of closeness between the two of them, except for that one scene where their oxygen supply was going to run out, and that was just made for dramatic purposes. But in terms of their relationship, I have not seen an actual culmination or a build of the closeness of who they are as people, letting their walls down, sharing intimate things, your fears, your hopes, your dreams, your collaboration to, have B'Elanna's tactical knowledge of engineering and Tom's joyriding, fly by the seat of his pants piloting skills, and turn it into something incredible. And we need to see that. We need to see these moments because, sure, the conversations can be off camera, but to believe their relationship, they need to be on camera.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up because I got a couple of comments about that. One is that, okay, there was a discussion around the idea that, well, in a personal, intimate relationship, that might be the thing to suffer first. So if B'Elanna is going to turn against anybody or shut anybody out first, it's probably the person who's closest to her, and in this case, it's Tom. So if we're going to have somebody step in to be able to get through to her, who she is able to open up to, okay, well, who's the next closest person to her on the ship? Well, that's Chakotay because they have this other shared experience. Right. Totally get on paper, I totally get that. But what you're bringing up is exactly the problem I have with going this direction in this episode. And that's that, well, we have told the audience about this relationship between B'Elanna and Tom. But what we have seen, what we have actually been shown, is terrible. Yeah. Not every moment, not every episode, but think back to them playing not 3D chess a few episodes ago, and it's them bickering. And think back to, well, you're getting defensive. No, you're getting defensive, right? Or whatever. And I'm sorry, but if that's all we're seeing, with the occasional little moment of, I'm going to replicate some wine, and well, It doesn't add up to a relationship. That was always my problem with Keiko and Miles. It's I love the idea of having a relationship that you see over time. Dare I say we got much better out of Riker and Troy.
Certainly not Worf and Dax.
Certainly no. But had we earned a lot of that up until now, I think I would have really felt something very strongly for Tom being shut out of this moment where she is really in need. And I would have thought, oh my God, now this is serious, where this relationship is going to suffer because of this. I get the idea, but it's almost like, well, yeah, they had to do it at Chakotay because we haven't earned the stuff with Tom and B'Elanna yet to make that really work.
And this could have been the moment where Tom, as much as he wanted to build that Delta Flyer, he said, that's not worth me losing B'Elanna over. Right? So he needed to make that grand gesture and see, this is why I'm here. This is the reason why I'm here with her. Not this ship, not this way. We're supposed to be starting a life together. Now, you can balance both of them out, but in the grand scheme of things, you have to choose one or the other. Tom chose the ship.
Yeah.
Tom chose the ship. So, hey, I hope that it works out further in season 5. Again, I don't really know, so we'll see.
Yeah.
All right, so this is something that we need to discuss, John, and part of this conversation may be triggering for some of our audience members, so please be advised that John and I are going to talk about something in a more serious nature here.
Yeah, and that is that, this episode really hinges on B'Elanna's journey and the state of mind in which we explore her here, and that is the self-harm that she expresses. And she says it very clearly in the episode that she is doing that in order to feel something. And this is very much pulled from the pages of psychology at the time, and now understand this kind of phenomenon among people who are, she says it in the episode that she is clinically depressed as being diagnosed by the doctor, by the EMH. I think there's a lot of room to be critical here of how B'Elanna's depression is treated in this episode, but I think there are also many points in this episode that are truthful, and hopefully we can kind of balance out both of those, with the caveat that neither of us are mental health professionals. We're only able to discuss this in the context of our understanding of what we've seen here on screen. B'Elanna here is defensive, and she is uninterested in work, and she is non-communicative. She is embarrassed about her condition. She has lost interest in the things that presumably would bring her pleasure, whether it's her relationship or just the simple enjoyment of banana pancakes. And I really have to hand it to the writers here to assume that they did a bit of homework to figure out how B'Elanna's condition would be expressed. I think the downside here, I don't want to jump too far ahead to our closing statements. I think the downside here is that we're trying to do all of this in one episode. So we fast forward through a lot. And you and I, in the past, we've kind of pointed out little moments and said, like, oh, B'Elanna's surly here. B'Elanna's really defensive here. But then you just kind of see that as a glimmer in an episode, and then it just sort of goes away. So there's a lot of inference that we have to do if we're trying to make this fit into her overall story. But I have to say that I come away from this really feeling for her, and also feeling that whether it's her being defensive and pushing people away, or just the other people in the crew not able to reach her, there is a real impasse when it comes to her mental health. What do you take from this?
Well, I mean, I agree with what you're saying here, and I want to bring another perspective to what is happening with the lack thereof, I should say, of how mental health is addressed in Star Trek. So in the scene where B'Elanna says, she's talking about how she's depressed, B'Elanna says to Chakotay, "What are you, the new ship's counselor?" And she says that very kind of in jest. And Chakotay says, "No, just a friend." And I think that this is one of the best examples, if this entire episode is one of the best examples of the lack of mental health support and support services that I've seen in Star Trek. I mean, B'Elanna is choosing self-harm and self-medication, healing herself with, dermal stimulators and things like that, to silently suffer through depression. Now, like you said, John, we're no experts in this field, but I have read enough to have at least an overview of seeing the depression in B'Elanna and the signs. And according to the National Institute of Mental Health's website, the signs and symptoms of depression. And the website says, if you have been experiencing some of the following signs and symptoms most of the day, nearly every day for at least 2 weeks, you may have depression. Now, these apply to B'Elanna. I'm not going to read them all, but the ones that apply to B'Elanna in general. Feelings of hopelessness or pessimism, feelings of irritability, frustration, or restlessness, feelings of guilt or worthlessness or helplessness, loss of interests or pleasure in hobbies and activities, fatigue, lack of energy, or feeling slowed down. This one's a big one. Difficulty concentrating, remembering, or making decisions. I mentioned that 1,000-yard stare, right?
Yeah.
Difficulty sleeping, waking too early in the morning, or oversleeping. So there are, so many other symptoms, but these manifested themselves in this episode. And I'm just aghast that in the 24th century that's being represented with as much technology that humanity has developed to travel between the stars, that something as critical as mental health care is so terribly ignored in this supposedly, quote unquote, advanced version of our supposed future. It's shocking. And there are ready-made characters like Neelix and the Doctor, well, especially Neelix, who's kind of like the de facto bartender, counselor, confessor. So I really wish they pushed a little bit more with, we understand the Doctor failed in his attempt to be a counselor, when it came to retrospect and what happened to Seven. And he gave up. And this is why they need him. Wouldn't
this have been the perfect opportunity for him to have a conversation with Janeway and Janeway say, hey, remember how I encouraged you to not delete that part of your program?
Yep.
Now's the time to explore it again because somebody here needs help and we're having trouble getting through to her. I feel like this is one of those all or nothing episodes where either you have to go all the way and really explore all the avenues of the help that she is getting or not getting in this case, or, we're just sort of lost here where it's like, okay, well, these moments come to a head and then we've got to wrap it all up in 45 minutes. That's kind of the difficulty with doing episodic TV, especially when you're trying to push a character beyond their limits like you are with B'Elanna.
What other ship systems need safety protocols? Should the replicators be on high alert depending on what Neelix is cooking?
So here we are, John, at the end of Extreme Risk, and pretty interesting discussion that we had. Very sobering topics, and I think that we're not quite done with this one yet. But at the end of every episode of Mission Log, we ask ourselves, does the episode hold up? And does it withstand the test of time? And then we eventually get to our morals, meanings, and messages, as is our purview for Mission Log. So let's start off with you, John. What else can we say still about Extreme Risk?
So we have to break down the episode into the two parts, unfortunately. There's an A plot and a B plot, whether we choose to call the Delta Flyer probe retrieval the A plot or B'Elanna's mental health journey the A plot. I think they're both given about equal time, maybe, but when it comes to the development of the Delta Flyer retrieving the probe, I'm having a real problem with the sense of urgency in any of that. There's a probe, and there's the Malon, and there's just the desire to build a hot rod shuttle, but it's a probe. I'm not, it's not that it's not a cool thing, and they try to throw you a bone and say, oh, but it's got the multiphasic shielding on it. All right. But it's
multiphasic, John.
It is. It's more than one phase.
That's right. It's like not two-dimensional chess. It's chess in three dimensions.
It's at least two phases. Yeah. So I think that falls flat. I think there are other ways to justify building the Delta Flyer, but this just feels like shoehorned in. Like, wow, there's this probe that we have to go get on this gas giant. Let's build a new shuttle, which we've wanted to do anyway. So that part, other than the Delta Flyer being cool, does not hold up for me. So that leaves us with the plot line about B'Elanna. And I'm not convinced that this was the way to do it. And I want to be careful here because I think that the idea of addressing this and addressing this with her, really important, really ambitious. But I feel like along the road here, we've had all these interesting glimpses into B'Elanna's personality and the struggles that she's had. Think way back to Faces. That was a really interesting way, maybe not the most successful episode by every measure, but it was a really interesting way to get to the root of who she is. And I feel like since then, she's just variously had these struggles with Tom, and I've been invested in some of those incidents more than others. Speaking of Tom, you brought it up. Where the hell is he in this episode for B'Elanna? Other than, okay, there is a scene in Act 1 where he acknowledges what's going on, but he's just off building the Delta Flyer. Chakotay has the good scenes with B'Elanna. Neelix has the good scene with B'Elanna. Janeway has a great scene with B'Elanna. But we needed to address, other than Tom just saying, like, yeah, she's not talking to me. I really think, like, we missed some of the emotional beats we're due to us here if we're treating this like a real relationship. Mm-hmm. So now, when it comes to this episode, I feel like all of these interesting ideas just kind of get shoehorned here. And it doesn't serve B'Elanna, and it certainly doesn't serve the seriousness of the topic. That's really the problem here. And I hate to keep saying episode after episode, well, they get an A for effort because at least they wanted to do something that was worthwhile. But I feel like in execution, it doesn't hold up. And unfortunately, I'm back here with this. I feel like very recently we had our supplemental episode with David Mack, and he wrote this novel, Firewall, about Seven of Nine between the end of Voyager and the beginning of Star Trek Picard. And that was this deep dive into this character that really just unveils layer after layer after layer of the psychology. And I know you can't do that in a TV episode, certainly not a single TV episode like this. But I kept thinking, well, if we're really getting into what makes B'Elanna tick, you kind of need the novel. I feel like this gives it short shrift. So the best I can say here is A for effort. I'm glad they went after something meaty. And I'm glad that Roxanne came to the producers and said, what if we do this? And they said, yeah, let's go for it. But when you stick that 45 minutes into multiple seasons of all these other distractions, I feel like it gets lost. So that's the trouble here. What about you, Norman?
I see it slightly differently. I agree with a lot of what you're saying here, but the reason why I say yes, it holds up for me is because they made the attempt to actually even try to address a mental health story, in Star Trek. They could have stuck the landing better, yes. But addressing the issues of mental health in Star Trek, as I said in discussion, has been woefully underrepresented ever since the original series, right? Yeah. Stick a guy in a chair and throw a bunch of blinking lights in there and scramble his mind, and there it is. Mental health, right? In the 23rd century at that time. And if it weren't for, say, Counselor Troy or even Esri Dax, as far as the Berman era, what is that, 17 years of Star Trek is concerned, mental health counseling would have had zero representation.
Yeah.
Zero representation. Imagine that in this supposed future where humanity can travel between quadrants, galactic quadrants, and create technology that can turn waste matter into food and feed mass populations and medicine to help us reach the pinnacle of physical perfection. They still haven't been able to adequately represent an entire profession that is specifically trained to help those who suffer mental illness of any kind. And the reason why I say yes, this holds up is because I think at least the attempt was made to try and show how obvious this is devoid in the system of Star Trek. So it's kind of like it's not obvious, but it's there. Chakotay says to B'Elanna, we're going to have to find another way to deal with this. You're going to have to find another way to deal with this. B'Elanna says, I don't know how. And Chakotay says, we'll figure it out together. Now, what I like about this scene, and back to my point, this is relevant to show the attempt for a friend to try and help someone and do the right thing versus a trained professional. And this is what we get a lot with Star Trek. We get the friendship, the family, the support, the camaraderie. But it's more than that when you're treating any kind of mental disorder, depression, or mental illness, right? You need somebody who's trained to understand how to reconnect somebody with what they've lost. A trained professional would try and create that safe and secure space so that their patient can open up and establish why they are suffering what they're suffering. And we don't get that with B'Elanna at the end. Sure, she gets on the Delta Flyer and performs her mission, and I'm sure that's very satisfying, but it's a little too cut and dry at the end. It's a little too kind of, swept under the rug in a traditional Star Trek Berman era 30 seconds or less resolution.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
And I mentioned before that Neelix and the Doctor are really the most likely choices to get in there to develop a counselor, because it's important to have that character. And I think that what this episode's proving to the audience is that there is a woeful lack of professional help available here.
Yeah, agreed. Well, look, as we kind of steer this toward our morals, meanings, messages, I do want to come back to something that you just pointed out with Chakotay there. Because as you said it, I was reminded of, well, one of the all-time great Star Trek episodes that we shockingly have not referenced in our recent conversations. You know, there are times that I feel like on Mission Log we'll go through the repeated references to the Corbomite maneuver. We'll go through repeated references to, you know, certain seminal episodes. And one that we have not gone back to very often is The City on the Edge of Forever. Now, everybody knows that episode as being this great kind of mind-bending time travel, what-if scenario, and of course, you know, the loss of one of Kirk's great loves, you know, all of these very indelible moments from the episode. But there's a moment, an exchange in that I think is so wonderful, so thoughtful, and it doesn't always get as much play as other moments from that episode. And that's when Kirk and Edith Keeler are walking and he points up to a star, right? Mm-hmm. And he said, I'm going to totally botch this because I'm doing off the top of my head, not reading it from the script here. But he says that in however many centuries, you know, a famous work will come from a planet around that star. And the three words that are even more important than I love you to come from that novel: let me help. That's so beautiful and so touching and so human. And it's what, particularly when we talk about mental health or anybody who is in a position that they need help, you know, sometimes we get trapped into saying the wrong thing because it is the feel-good or convenient thing, like, you've got this. Mm-hmm. Or, you know, or just do this instead or whatever. But there's something so much more intimate about let me help. And that's what I like about that scene that you pulled with Chakotay and B'Elanna. We'll figure it out together. Mm-hmm. That's the equivalent of that, because Chakotay doesn't have the answers. You pointed out very well who can maybe provide a bit better help, and I still question Chakotay's his methods. You know, I think that is ethically questionable, but he's not a trained professional in this place. You point out the need for the trained professional here, you know? Mm-hmm. So just wanted to give him a little bit of credit there, because I think that is the start of the process. Mm-hmm. So I mentioned it before, saying that I really want to give the writers the benefit of the doubt here. I think we should always use that as a caveat in any episode. Some hit, some miss, some really, you know, they're hitting for the bleachers, but they just don't quite get there. I do think that they had a great idea here and a provocative and thoughtful thread to follow with an important character here. And they went for it, and they should have gone for it. So for Voyager to at least take on mental health in some respect, I applaud the intent, again, even if the execution is poor. But what do we learn here through what B'Elanna learns here? And I think those lessons are pretty apparent. She can't keep her struggles bottled up. That, you know... Voyager doesn't offer all of the resources that she needs, but there are resources and there is support that she can get. I think unfortunately, she's got to go through more people than she has gone through so far. And I think she's got to turn back to the doctor. I think she's got to turn back to Neelix at some point. But at some point, she can get the help that she needs. And as you were describing this, the woeful state of mental health care in the 24th century, I also think back to Miles O'Brien on DS9 and that very shocking moment of turning a phaser on himself and almost pulling the trigger. Mm-hmm. And we kept asking us about how did it get to this point? It's not to say that people in the future don't have human problems. It's not to say that they aren't faced with the same things like crushing depression. And yes, those things exist because they're part of the human condition. But can we get better to the extent that we provide the help and resources that people need and make that a priority and make sure that people feel comfortable and confident seeking that out? Mm-hmm. And maybe B'Elanna's a special case here, but I would love to have seen even more of rallying around her from the rest of the crew of Voyager.
Especially Tom.
Especially Tom, yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, any one of those people who could have said, let me help.
Yeah. I love that you brought that up. That's such a great line. And you're right, it's so understated and overlooked, but perfect, because it kind of like leads into I found all three, the morals, meanings, and messages, in this episode. I'm going to ask you this. I'm going to ask the audience this. Have you ever heard of a phrase, or this phrase, alone in a crowded room? Or, I'm alone in a room full of people, right? Yeah. This is the result of emotional isolationism. And I'm sure many of us have felt this way. Now, I discovered several interesting online articles using these keywords: emotion, compromise, depression, denial, isolation, self-harm, and mental health. And I found this particular article of interest. The article is entitled Emotional Isolation. Now, that's a term that I've never heard of before. This is just part of my research. This comes from the website Loneliness New Zealand, or NZ, or NZ.
Okay.
Now, on their main page, there's a header at the very top that states, in mid-November 2023, the World Health Organization launched the Commission on Social Connection, their first global initiative to tackle the epidemic of loneliness. So how am I going to relate this to B'Elanna? Well, being emotionally isolated is when your defense mechanism kicks in, and how to protect yourself from emotional distress. You stop naturally communicating with people. When you do communicate with them, you keep the communication to a superficial level. So you might have a wide social circle, yet you probably show little interest in their feelings. And in that way, you avoid intimate relationships altogether. You might put barriers in the way of deepening relationships, and you might socially isolate yourself from people to avoid getting hurt. Most importantly, you keep your feelings entirely to yourself, and you are not able to receive emotional support from others. You might even repress or suppress your own thoughts, feelings, opinions, and beliefs. You might feel as if you have shut down or feel numb. So that is the information from the article. What does all of this have to do with the triple M's I found? Well, in this episode, it's really about like the obligation of those, like you were talking about. Let me help, right, John? Like Chakotay to B'Elanna, who can reach out and help a friend in need, to fight for them, right, and get them the support they need, or to even get them the professional help they deserve. I believe that mental health issues won't disappear in the future, no matter how far into the stars humanity may travel. So neither should compassion or empathy and human connection, because these are the tools that we still need to make sure that people feel like they matter and belong. As long as we are still climbing out of the forced isolation of our pandemic, real connection, not social media, but real, personal, human connection is the only way we're going to truly make a difference in people's lives.
Mission Log is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. If you'd like to support us directly, you can do so at patreon.com/missionlog for early access to shows and the Mission Log Discord. Our website is missionlogpodcast.com, and for more Star Trek news and discussion, visit trekmovie.com.
On the next Mission Log, In the Flesh.
Some of the music for Mission Log provided by Warp 11, online at warp11.com. Special thanks to consulting producers, Matt Esposito, Homer Frizzell, Julie Miller, Mike Richards, Mike Shadable, Paul Shadwell, and David Takechi. The only thing worse than extreme sports in the holodeck is when your program suddenly shuts off and you're standing on a giant Omega symbol. End transmission.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.